Hello again, everybody. This is a video about data collection. This is the second lesson in our new unit, which was data management and probability and statistics. I've also included in Classroom fill in the blanks sheet that you can use with this note. So I recommend you print that off in advance and then you fill that in as we go through this lesson. Please save that for later. Yes, there will be a quiz at some point on this information. And of course, it is vastly interesting and perhaps the most important math about data collection you will do today. So please fill in as we go. Now, our learning goal for today is to consider some techniques and terminology around the collection of data. A portion of this will be review for you. You will have heard some of these terms in past years, but we need to go through it to make sure everyone's on the same page as far as what is meant when we use these words. All right, so population, and again, please be filling in your sheet as you're going through. A population is the whole group that is being studied. We use the word a little bit differently than when we talk about it in geography, for example, where population includes all of the people who live in a country. Now, again, as with my first example here, a population geographically can be the same, but when we talk about a population with statistics, we're usually talking about something a little bit different than that. So all Canadians could be, but it could also be all the parts in a box, for example, could be a population, or all the cats in a pet store. It's basically a big group that's being studied. And again, it doesn't have to be people. Although when we're talking about surveys, yes, usually you are surveying people, not a cat or an inanimate object. All right. Now, a census is a survey of an entire population. Okay, and Canada does these every 5 years, I believe. And this provides information about big groups of the people that they use to decide where to allocate funding and just to provide examples of how our culture is growing and changing over time. But note, as I have at the bottom here, that it can be difficult and expensive to survey everyone, which is why they only do it every 5 years and not more often than that. Okay, now a sample is a part of the population. Okay, and more typically when you're doing surveys, you are only surveying a sample and then using that information to make bigger conclusions about the whole population. Okay, because finding and surveying a sample of a population, a smaller part, is much easier and much cheaper and much more feasible for just one person or a small number of people to do. Okay, so our example of a sample here, so everyone attending a basketball game would be a population. 100 random people from the game would be a sample of the population. Okay, so everybody is the population, everyone in a particular area or group, but 100 random people out of that population would be just a sample that we might use. Okay, now a sample can certainly be biased if it does not represent the population. Okay, and when we talk about bias here, we're not talking about what's often deemed, in relation to race or gender or religion or anything like that. We're talking more about something that makes the results not as good as they could be because we've not picked a good sample. All right, so please make sure you see it in the correct way. So an example here, a sample of the grade 8 class should include boys and girls in a similar proportion to real life, but a sample of only 5 boys would be a biased sample, so it would not represent all of the grade 8s if I only picked 5 boys. Okay, a sample can also be biased if certain people or groups of the larger population are not represented. So that's kind of done in that example there, but it can come up in other ways in real world examples. Okay, and a random sample of people is usually seen as more representative and can help eliminate sample bias. It can't completely eliminate it, but it can certainly help. Okay, so if I was to randomly choose students from grade 8, that would be more likely to represent the whole class than if I went in and just chose 5 boys. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, a survey, when you're conducting a survey of a sample, a survey is deemed to be valid if the result represents the entire population. Okay, so if a survey, and a biased sample is unlikely to produce a valid survey result. So someone reading your survey, if your sample was biased, might just say, you know what, the results you came up with are not valid. They would not be representative. Okay, and I say unlikely in this example here about a biased sample because it is possible they will happen to be the same as the entire population. Okay, it's just less likely to happen. And if you were to do this in a more important setting in university, if an actual statistician or an economist were to make a study where the sample was very biased, it would just be discounted. The results would not be considered good. Okay, which is a very serious thing if that becomes your job someday or part of a university credit or something like that. You need to make sure you've got a good sample. All right, last we'll do just a few examples. So for each sample below, determine which would be biased. Again, we're biased sample, and which would not. So I'd love it if you paused the movie and just went through very quickly and decided which were biased and which were not. So I'll give you just a moment to do that. I'm assuming you're pausing it and obeying my instructions and maximizing your learning. All right, so when we talk about which ones are biased, so A, to find out about healthy eating habits, a survey is given only to people in a fast food restaurant. Yes, this one would be biased, so I'll give it a big B for bias, because you're only looking at people in a fast food restaurant whose healthy eating habits may be somewhat different than if you did the survey only in a health food store, for example, although even that would be biased as well. Next one, a survey asking about favorite types of pets is given to every 10th customer at a pet food store. That one should be okay. That every 10th customer typically will mean that it's somewhat random. You're not just picking, for example, people who come in with cats, which would change what their likely answer would be with the favorite types of pets. Okay, so third, a survey asking about a favorite sport is given to a hockey team. All right, that would probably be biased as well. Again, it doesn't guarantee it. Maybe half the hockey team has a completely different favorite sport, but it's more likely that they would say hockey, for example, than if you gave it to a lacrosse team or if you randomly gave it to a whole bunch of people across a city or a town or something. Okay, so hopefully those examples made sense. Please try out the worksheets that I've attached, but as I mentioned before, carefully read the instructions that I have in Classroom to make sure you're doing the work that needs to be done for this particular thing. And again, please feel free to ask lots of questions during our meetings or email or in Google Classroom. Have a great day.